Thank you for joining us for another episode of Therapy Unlocked. This week, we'll be continuing the conversation about boundaries. On Therapy Unlocked, we discuss all things therapy from an unlocked perspective. Please join the conversation with us on YouTube and Instagram. As always, we want to let you know that this podcast is for education and amusement purposes only. Please like, follow, subscribe, join the conversation, and we thank you for listening.
Explain the benefits of it, like the benefits of boundaries allowing you to have like higher self-esteem, higher self-respect. It helps you protect your physical and emotional space from intrusion. It helps you have like an equal partnership where responsibilities are shared. It helps you to be assertive. It really helps you like separate your needs, thoughts, and feelings from others, because sometimes the lines can get blurred. And then the last thing, like I'll mention, is it really empowers you to make healthy choices and take responsibility for your own self. All good things.
There's so much responsibility in boundaries. There's so much personal responsibility in boundaries. I wonder how many people are making that connection at this time, because boundaries, much like narcissism, is really a code word. Right now on social media for just about anything, it feels like. So, personal responsibility feels like maybe even the most important part of setting a boundary.
I think the most important part of setting a boundary is identifying the need for the boundary. If you don't know why you need the boundary, why are you setting a boundary? What's the point? Just because you should? Just because somebody else said you should?
Well, there you go. That's important. How do you identify what is a boundary that you need versus a boundary that you are shitting on yourself about?
Right. Are you saying yes to helping somebody move because you feel like you should so that they'll be happy? Well, that's an unhealthy boundary by feeling responsible for somebody else's happiness.
Interesting. Yeah. So if the internal boundary that you set for yourself is if a friend asks you to move, you must say yes, because that is supported by the fact that, if you're ever moving, you want them to help you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then, is that boundary set out of your personal needs, or is that boundary set out of, obligation or perceived social obligation? Because
right. And it makes a difference. What if that person who said yes to helping that friend move now lost their job because they missed their shift, because they said yes to the friend? Like, there's all sorts of factors that go into boundaries. But I wanted to mention one other unhealthy boundary. People who share too much too soon, or other end of the spectrum, closing yourself off and not expressing at all your wants or needs. Those two things can be unhealthy boundaries.
Absolutely. And it extends in such ways. I'll go back to what I was talking about before. You've got your external boundaries, and then your interpersonal boundaries, and then your internal boundaries. It makes me picture a mandala almost of where those things would intercross and intersect to support your whole personhood, your whole personality.
Do you know what to do, like once you've identified the boundary, like how to go ahead and set it?
Personally, I like to swear, but what is the recommendation?
Don't get angry. So nix the swearing. You don't have to justify or explain yourself in any way, shape, or form, because you're an adult, assuming that because this podcast is for adults.
We are grown. We are grown. It's something I have definitely said. I said, excuse me, we are grown.
This is the last one that's really hard for people. Don't apologize. No, I'm sorry, I can't, or I'm sorry, but stop apologizing.
I'm sorry, but that's like 20% of my personality. What do you mean stop apologizing? I've probably started the majority of my boundary conversations with, I'm so sorry, but I can't let you do that. Or that's not going to work out. Or let me give you some time to accommodate my boundary. in the sentence that I'm giving
Nope.
out here. Let me give you some time.
You are not responsible for how the other person reacts to the boundary that's being set. And so we're, as the boundary setter, we're only responsible for communicating the boundary in a clear and respectful manner. How that's taken, that's not my problem. Not my, what do they say in the Harvard Business Review? Or the Harvard Business School put out a thing where it was like, not my monkey. Yeah, that's what it is. Not my monkey.
Not my circus, not my monkey. That said, what about, like I said before, you put the boundary out there, they don't accept it, they don't take it, they find it unreasonable. You know, how do you, if you can't run, if you're not going to run, this is somebody that maybe a coworker, maybe a child's teacher, or someone that you have a forced orbit with. You know, they're not, what if they choose not to respect your boundary?
There would be a natural consequence of some kind, I imagine. If it's somebody you're choosing to remain in contact with, you might choose to give them less information. You might choose to give shorter responses. You might choose to not engage in the communication. You can be in the same proximity in someone and not speak. That's okay. We're here to work. Let's work. You can.
You are the queen of boundary setting in every way. I speak from personal experience. I lived with you. There's when I think about boundaries, I definitely will throw back to you. What do you say to the people who say that you need to keep sweet, so to speak? That boundary setting is rude, that the way that you are interacting is abrasive.
That is a myth. It is a myth that setting a boundary is rude, because setting a boundary is about protecting. And that actually brings me to my book recommendation, because it does talk about in this book about how you might feel like selfish or guilty or embarrassed when you set a boundary. So this is called Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. I should give a religiosity disclaimer. If you can read through the God language, this is a really good book. They do quote scripture though. So I thought we could do something fun if you're up for it. Give me a random page and I'll give you a random quote.
69.
Okay. So
we're keeping it academic in here.
On page 69, it says, in the practicing phase, children learn that aggressiveness and talking initiative are good. Parents who firmly and consistently set realistic boundaries with children in this period, but without spoiling their enthusiasm, help them through the transition. Have you ever seen the posters depicting babies' first steps? Some of these portray the wrong notion. They present the child taking hesitant steps towards the waiting mother, arms outstretched. The truth is different. Most mothers report, I watched my baby's first steps from behind. The practicing toddler moves from safety and warmth to excitement and discovery. Physical and geographical boundaries help the child learn action without danger. Bam! Random page out of the book. What'd you think of that?
That was excellent. It was relatable as a mother. You know, and true. You know, most of the time, my first thought as you were reading that is, oh, I've seen quite a few kids take their first steps. I've done, you know, I have some, and then I babysat. And most of the time they're walking to food. They're headed for a resource. They're headed for a cool toy or food or a friend.
I can get this myself now. Let me just go get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that my oldest first walked because it was lunchtime at daycare and he had to carry his tray to the table, and otherwise he wasn't going to get his food. So it was time. You know, that's my personal experience with that. And it is well thought out to do that randomly and pick a random page. What would you say?
Barnum effect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that felt immediately targeted. So that's a wonderful recommendation. What can we do to strengthen our boundaries, to exercise our boundary muscles? Do you believe in the rejection therapy TikToks and the people who are intentionally trying to get turned down and things along those lines? How can we flex those muscles maybe without making a fool of ourselves?
I guess I haven't seen that trend. Can you
Oh,
explain that a little
fascinating.
bit?
So what they do is it's usually captioned or titled rejection therapy. And they will intentionally go to a public place and speak with strangers and ask them, maybe something outlandish with the hopes that they will say no. And the majority of the time they do say no. And the idea is that by going through rejection therapy, you will get used to rejection and live with less fear.
So there's actually a therapeutic technique where you ask people unnecessary questions in the similar vein. The assignment that I give people is to ask the time. I guess it's kind of before people had phones in their pockets and everybody had the time. But what I used to tell people was ask an unnecessary question, such as, do you have the time? And somebody might not. Somebody might tell you no. Somebody might say, don't you have a phone? Somebody might say, yes, let me get my phone and show you. Or somebody might check their watch and say the time. You might get a myriad of responses by having an unnecessary communication. That's usually more along the lines of reducing social anxiety, though. I haven't seen that as far as boundary setting, but it makes sense to get used to rejection. So, after just a cursory explanation, I would have to say, yes, I agree with getting used to rejection is healthy. And I had to do that when I first moved to Oklahoma and started applying for applications for jobs right out of college. Nobody wanted to hire a new graduate with no experience. So I was unemployed for 3 months. I got no after no after no until I finally got that yes. And that's just something that you have to figure out how to be okay with. But I would say that a good reminder of when a boundary might be useful. Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling resentful? Do you find yourself complaining left and right? If you answered yes to any of those, maybe just set a boundary. And it is a process, but
That touches on my favorite therapy tool of all time, which is the feelings wheel. I love a feelings wheel. If you are in any way struggling as a person, or even if you're not, I think hugely if you're not, because our language is so lazy as Americans, and you think, oh, that pisses me off. Okay, well, what does that even mean? That pisses me off. Or, oh, I'm freaking out. Okay, well, what does that mean? I'm freaking out. I will literally turn to a feelings wheel and say, where is this lying? Am I scared? Am I uncomfortable? Am I feeling jealous? Am I aggressive? There's so many different options, and it can really help you set that jumping off point for where you need the boundaries internally or externally to identify where the feeling is originating from, which is yet another way to circle this back to therapy. If you can't figure out your feelings, probably a good time to go to therapy.
yes, therapy can
Feelings
help
will help
immensely
too.
with identifying and processing emotions and feelings, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So did you have anything else on boundaries?
They're awesome. Do it.
They're awesome.
It is a process, and I would say set them in your own time frame, not when somebody else shoulds on you. Like when somebody else says oh, you need to set that boundary, girl, don't do it then. Do it when you want to, when you're ready to, when you say, okay, I've had enough. No. And you don't have to say no. That's the other thing I'll mention is that in saying no, you don't have to say no. You can say, I would rather, for not, I can't, it's not in the cards. There's a variety of ways to say no without saying the word N-O. But on that note, no is a complete sentence.
And from the casual perspective, from the civilian perspective, what I was reminded of in you saying set them on your own time is, it's okay to stay till you hate him if that's what you have to do. Safety notwithstanding, if you're in danger, do your best to get out of there. But people will should on you if you're in a toxic relationship, a bad relationship, and they will say, you should leave that man. You should get out of that relationship. I posted a a reel on our Instagram page, I believe this morning, that was talking about, hearing your client talk again about that awful man and how she should leave him. But that said, do it on your own time. Sometimes you need to stay until you hate him, so you have that strong boundary to make that strong action. Hate is one of those strongest emotions that you can feel. And I think that a lot of women are misunderstood in sitting and enduring abuse when really they haven't mustered that strength yet. And that strength of being, feel your hate, Anakin,
Love the Star Wars reference.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's fantastic. And I think boundaries are one of those ever evolving conversations because they're flexible and they have to grow with you and they have to grow on you. And if you're feeling reticent to the setting of boundaries at all, and you need to start practicing, like Kat was espousing a little bit ago, it's not a big deal to ask someone an irrelevant question and just get used to that feeling of rejection. It's a solid plan to identify your boundaries, identify, whether they're external, whether they're internal, what feeling do they come from? And then it's okay to feel guilty and do it anyway. When you go forth and you try a new thing, it might be uncomfortable. That doesn't mean that the medicine is not a bitter taste to provide the cure. So I think maybe that's a decent summary of our boundary chat. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all doing the best that we can at each and every moment in time with the information that we have at the time.
Definitely. If you're looking for more research or more information on boundaries, I would love to refer you to Kat's IDK podcast, which is where we are streaming right now, because I believe she has spoken on boundaries several times.
And on my blog, too, on my website, katrinadragon.com, there is a blog page as well, where I think there's a post about 4 basic boundaries. There's one on struggles with boundaries. I'll put links in the notes.
Absolutely. And talk about a great read, your blog. For the academic perspective or the layman's perspective, it is interesting and engaging, and you can just get a lot of insight from that. So I hope that people not only follow and subscribe, but consider checking out Katrina's blog, which is available on her website, katrinadragon.com.
All right. That's it for today. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Therapy Unlocked.